Welcome back, friends. This is the Optimal Health Program podcast. Dr. Chris Calapai. As I promised before, we're going to have a lot of great interviews, and today is one of the best interviews. A gentleman who I had seen a few years back, and he'll tell his entire complicated story. He had a traumatic brain injury. He was blown up in a vehicle overseas, and he's going to chat and go through his progression. I wanted to bring Josh on board. Josh, how are you?
Great. Thanks for having me on, Doc.
Great to see you, buddy. You look terrific.
Thanks. I try.
So, yeah, as an educational format, we want to be able to teach people, what can happen if you follow the right program or protocol. And we talk a great deal about stem cells for a wide range of things. And your case is one of the most significant, one of the most poignant of all. And so thrilled you've had the result. I wanted people to get an idea as to your background and, how you got into, your field and, became preeminent in your job, and then you went overseas, et cetera, and what happened?
Joined the Army just before the towers went down, 2000. Spent a few deployments over at Afghanistan as an infantryman, eventually becoming a Green Beret with the U.S. Army. I was a weapons sergeant. On my fifth deployment, we finally, pulled the slot machine handle one too many times, and came up lemons on about 100-pound IED that hit our vehicle, and it still hurts a little bit. Went through the entire military treatment process for traumatic brain injuries, which it consists primarily of, therapies, medications, ocular therapy, physical therapy, vestibular therapy. Talked about my feelings. They like to put a lot of the stuff in the PTSD category, which was a little difficult for me to accept because I was injured on my fifth deployment, and under their theory, I caught PTSD, the same day I got blown up.
Can you tell them a little bit about, because you had discussed with me, I remember a conversation a while back about being inside the vehicle and, the concussion and the compression and the multi-organ system, damage all over your body. It's not though you kind of, bumped your head or someone falls down and they hit themselves. It's a major explosive traumatic, event.
Yes. So, we've spent a lot of time and money making explosions more dangerous for the people that experience them. And having experienced one, I guess, to put it in perspective, it was about 100 pounds of HME or homemade explosive. We call it the same kind of explosive that took down the Oklahoma City building, which was the second largest terrorist attack on U.S. soil. And the terrorists were using similar materials, and we were on, for a comparison, we were sitting on about 100 pounds of explosive, whereas the Oklahoma City bomb, I think, was closer to 1,000. But blast is a really, really spectacular event to experience because of all the forces that are taking place. And if you look in the literature, they'll say there's the primary injury and then there's tertiary injuries. Primary being the blast wave itself passing through your body. The tertiary injuries being the vehicle being thrown around and then, your body hitting the different things in there. The primary mechanism, though, of blast is really interesting, and I like to think about it in terms of divers. So a diver, I'm not a SEAL, so I don't know anything about Boyle's Law or anything, but I know a diver can't go down, be pressurized to atmospheres of pressure, and then ascend quicker than his bubbles. So I think the world record free diver's gone down like 160 meters, and that's about 4 atmospheres of pressure that he experienced. And that whole dive took him several minutes. Whereas in a blast, the human body is compressed to 3 to 4 atmospheres and then decompressed in milliseconds. And so I imagine that the inside of my body probably would look like if you took a baseball bat and hit a can of Sprite and you were able to see the inside. I imagine that whereas with the bends, nitrogen leaks out of the cells. I think that any cells carrying large amounts of nitrogen maybe burst open I think
it's a slower process, and it's not as horrific as, a gigantic multi-organ, multi-system, concussion. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it damages every cell in the body, from the pressurization, depressurization, the pressure wave coming up from underneath. I think if you could, if I ever get money, I'll put an explosive under one of these vehicles that I was in and film one of those clear mannequins like that in those sword shows. And I think, the tibia and fibia will deform. I think the skull likely, either you'll see a pressure wave go through it, or it'll crush. I mean, I can only tell you from my experience that it's the most devastating injury I've ever had that was completely closed. I wasn't bleeding afterward. I was knocked unconscious. But I didn't realize how badly I'd been hurt. It took me a little while to realize, because the body's spectacular. It's a redundant system. The brain, the amount of damage that, and I'm sure we'll get into this, that I think the brain experiences during the event it's like getting Alzheimer's all at once. It's, football spent 20 years getting PTSD. And I think, exposure to a blast of this size, which is not uncommon for service members, is like getting CTE all at once.
Yeah. Oh boy. So, and you went through a variety of different things at multiple facilities in VAs, and they were trying to create some sort of benefit. But from what you told me.
Yeah, I was lucky because I was in special operations. I had, what they call it tip of the spear treatment. I was treated. First, I was in a warrior transition unit, spent the last year and a half in the Army, in and out of doctor's appointments, so upwards of 20 a week at times. There was, PTSD therapy. I did yoga. I talked about my feelings. I drew pictures. At one point, I went to a VA program in Tampa. It was a 3-month inpatient, their polytrauma program. Some good stuff down there and some good doctors, other stuff not great. But I did, Delta Force guy and a Navy SEAL were playing with horses for equine therapy. I mean, when I say I covered the bases, I spent 2 months in a hyperbaric chamber, was treated at the Cleveland Clinic for, you name it, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. I took anti-seizure meds, pain meds, sleep meds, lithium, Valium, Adderall. For me, I basically told the doctors, I will set my face on fire and put it out with a rake if you tell me that will get me back on a team, doing the job that I worked so hard to get and that I loved so much.
Yeah.
And in that process, I didn't just not get better, I got worse. So I don't have much recollection of the remainder of that deployment that I was on. I got blown up 2 weeks in. 30 days later, we basically, we're looking for the guys that had emplaced the IED. They had successfully attacked other units in the area that we were operating in. And a month later, we were back blowing doors. I was actually knocked unconscious with an explosive breach on that operation. I have, fragments of memories from that deployment. And really the next 4 years, I have little to no memories of, anything. And it was just luck that a friend of mine had been contacted by an organization that I believe you contacted and had offered to provide the treatment for a few guys. And it was funny because I don't know if you remember this, but I had sent you x-rays of my shoulders and my knees because we didn't know about the intranasal stem cell treatment that you ended up.
Sure.
And, I don't know that I've ever told you this story, but when you called me, I wasn't used to talking to for-profit doctors, who actually would explain things and give me options and, try and help me understand. At the VA, they're like, here's your pills. You don't want them. You're not compliant. Get out. And so I was in the middle of something. I kind of wanted to get going. I was trying to get off the phone. And then you had told me that you'd given the intranasal stem cell treatment to a guy who'd had a stroke, and I said, hey, let's pump the brakes on my knees here. Would that work for a traumatic brain injury? And you said, yeah, that would work great. And I said, well, could we could we try that treatment instead? And very generously, offered to give me that treatment as opposed to the one for my knees and shoulders. And I got to be honest, man, at that point, that sad look in the doctor's eyes when I told them what they were doing wasn't helping, it was the only thing that I got any kind of joy out of, because they all promised, every single one of them, gave me a similar speech that you gave me, like, hey, I really think this will help you. And what I felt like at the time was that a lot of that stuff was self-serving. This is the treatment they had to sell. And if they didn't sell a certain number of those treatments, they wouldn't, make their nut for the week.
Yeah.
And you said, look, man, I don't know, but I think it'll work. And we went in, and, I didn't think much of it. I'd been poked and prodded and hated and for so long that I had very little faith that it was going to work. And, I was in a pretty bad spot in my marriage, as a father, really struggling to do
and not to
much
mention
of anything.
The toll it takes on your entire family. I mean, seeing you in such a bad place, it's hard on your whole family.
Well, and I think we'll get into this, but, one of the main issues that a lot of guys that have suffered these types of head injuries deal with is what I was diagnosed with was irritable intermittent explosive disorder. I believe, if I remember correctly, Access 3 secondary to post-traumatic blast or something. I don't know exactly what it was, but in all the service members that I've talked about from every branch of special operations, every different flavor of guy, these irritable outbursts, these angry outbursts are a common thread. And when we talk about them, that is the most difficult, damaging thing to the relationship with a family, with our kids.
Sure.
And really the only thing that I was ever trying to get treated for, because prior to my blast, I never had any irritable outbursts.
Sure.
It's never angry.
There's such a distortion of the neurochemistry. Your brain chemicals are just not hitting receptors right, and receptors are damaged. So it's just a completely upside down mechanism where in a perfect world, your brain would make neurotransmitters and your cells respond and everything's nice and calm and easy. So that's just completely thrown, upside down.
So, and this is, I will, if you're all right with it, I'll get into my novel theory here, but there was recently a study in, I believe, Maryland, where they placed EEG leads in the brains of Alzheimer's patients and witnessed seizures between parts of the brain that were basically, you couldn't see them when you put the EEG leads outside of the skull. And Alzheimer's is a condition characterized by tangles of uninsulated neurons. CTE, multiple sclerosis, and some other conditions are conditions that, Alzheimer's and dementia lead to uninsulated neurons. CTE through degeneration, CTE achieves the same effect through damage. So that blast wave we talked about, ripping through the brain, does a couple of things. Number one, it moves tissues of different densities at different rates, specifically the white and gray matter in the brain, shearing neurons, axonal damage. The other and more important mechanism, and this is where I think that the stem cells help me, and it's a math problem, right? We have 86 billion neural connections in a healthy brain. You can lose, and this is the science, I argue you may be able to lose more. You can lose half in a severe traumatic brain injury. What CTE really is that the myelin insulating the neurons is knocked off the neurons. All right, that myelin then is trapped in the blood-brain barrier because it comes off in chunks that are too large to be filtered out of the blood-brain barrier. So now you have scarring, and that's how you diagnose CTE. You would take the brain out, slice it thin, dye it, look at it under a microscope, and you're looking for fractal patterns of tau proteins. In blast injuries, it's a slightly different pattern. I'm not medical enough to know or be able to describe the difference, but what that scarring is the leftover myelin that's knocked off the neurons. The myelin is like the wires behind our TV. And that myelin, not only the difference between, the insulation on your TV wires and the insulation in your brain is that the insulation is also an amplifier. So neurons that are uninsulated conduct information at 1/100th the speed of insulated. Right.
That's well documented, of course, with MS and a lot of the neurological disorders.
Yeah, and the guy I brought up a couple weeks ago with MS, by the way, he's doing really good. Has pretty amazing results.
Can't wait to talk to him. Yeah,
he's doing good. So where these seizures come in, right, is that you have all these uninsulated neurons laying on top of each other, and just like if you strip the wires off of, strip the insulation off the wires behind your TV, if you turn your TV on, you're not going to get a picture anymore. You're going to get static. And the brain works so quickly that static presents itself as speech disturbances, balance problems, memory issues, and most frequently emotional regulation, which, by the way, comes from the frontal lobe. Okay, drives the rear of the brain, which means the most intelligent thoughts, the most difficult thoughts to produce. Somebody cuts me off, and instead of getting angry about it, I go, okay, well, maybe he's in a hurry, or it would be unsafe to maneuver dangerously in response to that. Those thoughts have to travel the most bad road to get back to the control center of the brain.
Right.
And that's why a lot of the guys that are suffering from the same kind of injuries I had have issues with modulation of mood, control of their emotions. And I think those are seizures. And I'll take it a step further and go further off the beaten path, just because somebody who might know better could hear this. But if those things are occurring, right, and I think the way the seizures occur is that your eyes talk to your vestibular system, which talks to the thalamus, distributes the information. If that information is sent from the eyes to the thalamus, and because the neuron that's sending the signal is laying bare over 3 other neurons, the information is distributed, creating second and third order, unintended second and third order effects.
Right.
Wasting energy that would be designed to get to the neuron that needs to bring the information. So we have
a distorted signal, yeah.
Yeah, a loss of fidelity in best case.
And that creates the violence, yeah. That could create the violent outburst in thought, yeah.
Yeah, so that signaling, if it's not received properly, is sent again at a higher power and a higher power and a higher power, which then sends more of these unintended signals, which I can tell you it's very disorienting. Anybody who's had a seizure, a stroke, they'll tell you when your brain stops working, it's confusing. Losing the ability to speak or remember or control your emotions. It's difficult, scary. It's hard for the families. But then we have a situation, I think, and this is specific for veterans, and I'm trying to coin the term pre-TSD. So through training, stress, and repetition, we elicit the body's fight response, which is most succinctly defined as dumping adrenaline on a fire. So whereas if I have one of these little seizures, and I think these can occur hundreds of times a day, my brain goes through this little doom loop until I run out of glucose in my brain. But if something triggers the adrenal response, like I feel like somebody wants to fight me, my wife's going to leave me, I'm getting fired from my job, and the warning light on the dashboard that goes on that I programmed in there through my combat training signals the adrenaline dump, now I have a seizure that's running on adrenaline. And if I could find a place to put my money, I would bet my entire house that these are the seizures that our service members are committing suicide during these suicidal seizures. You have this adrenal fueled seizure in the brain, only between parts of the brain, leaving some function in the body working properly. Mm-hmm. Well, the other ones are running wild, unchecked on the adrenaline.
So give us some perspective of when you first, started to come back, and you were months away from the explosion, the injury, in difficulty in thought process and in focus and concentration. There wasn't much that the traditional approach did to help to improve or stabilize that.
I would say that in the aggregate, all other treatments other than the intranasal stem cell treatment are at best placebo effect. Any of them medications, all right, so if I have a condition you can't diagnose until I'm dead, where's the drug trial that says we can give you I had some success with anti-seizure medications, treatments, and diets. But other than that, everything else, at best case, was placebo. A lot of the meds that I was taking, they put me on SSRIs, all these other things that the side effects were unbelievable. And I
but
believe
they're not
that's
changing
often,
any of the underlying, the main underlying cause. The main cause of the main issue is damage and destruction of cells and their inability to have electrical current, pass appropriately through different tissues and to make neurotransmitters. So all of that is a result of damage and destruction of cells. There's no brain test that can tell us 1 million cells, 1 billion cells were killed or destroyed. And as much as we like a SPECT scan or an MRI, et cetera, that gives us some information. But that's why we've been talking about the fact that stem cell answers that issue, answers that, call. You're putting brand new cells in intravenous and nasally so that you have new cells and those stem cells become brand new brain cells and they keep dividing.
Well, I think it's so interesting because I believe what I'm describing is a math problem. All right. It takes 30 years, 27 years for women, 30 years for men to fully assemble the 86 billion neuronal connections in a brain. In addition to that, we have to coat all of those neurons 360 degrees with myelin for the brain to work properly. And you damage every cell in the body and you pass a tipping point. It would take 30 years if my body was 17 years old, cranking out HGH and testosterone and scavenging the materials necessary to build brain tissue. If you're injured, and I was injured at 33, I think, 34, your body's not building brain anymore. All right, it's maintaining. And so it doesn't have the ability to produce all of the necessary brain tissue that it took 30 years to scavenge out.
So give us the perspective of from the injury time and your loss of function. What did you first start to see when the procedure was done? Did you have relief of pain? Did you have better focus? In other words, try to walk us through the improvements that you had when we did the procedure.
Okay, so I left your office not feeling anything, and I got to the lobby, and I actually called my wife, and I said, "Babe, I'm not really sure if it's a pink cloud effect or it had so many things that had so much promise that lasted for a week." And the first thing I noticed was, and the thing I noticed in the 4 other guys that we've treated through the Blastology Foundation and through your generous donations, is just a little bit more, a little less anxiety. I just felt a little better. When I call the guys and I ask them in the first weeks after, I'm like, "How do you feel?" I say, "I just feel a little better." And I just felt a little bit better every day. I felt a little, to describe how it felt like before the treatment, I had no ability to draw on memories, even from the recent past, to plan for even the near future. I tell people it was like being an animal. Anything I needed it now. And anything I had to talk about, I had to get it out now. It was almost like a permanent manic state. I really most closely identify it with feeling like an animal. And the build, it was slow. Where you reassembled my brain for me, by the way. Thank you very much. That really, changed my life. And we'll get into, how great things are now. But it took every day for the first 30 days, I just felt a little better. There was no wild magical moment where I was like, "Oh, I'm cured." That came later after we did the second treatment, actually, was when, really hit home. But in that first year, it took time. My irritable outbursts were fewer and further between. My just general feeling of wellness. We talk about doctors talk about the general feeling of impending doom when we're talking about that's what they teach us. If we're treating a casualty on the battlefield and hey, I got a bad feeling, they're bleeding everywhere. Like that is a sign that person, may be moving towards the light. And that feeling was with me all the time prior to the treatment. And so that slowly faded away. And one of my favorite quotes from one of the guys that we treated was, things just don't feel as dark. And so for the first 4 months, 5 months, it's just a slow parting of the clouds, and a feeling that, okay, maybe this can get better, because I was in so much pain. I was having so much difficulty navigating the most basic tasks of my day, going from, you probably find somebody who say I wasn't any good at my job. I'm sure you find a bunch of guys that say I was great at it. I felt like I was pretty good. And I went from having a photographic memory to not being able to account for my weapons on a piece of paper that I would, look at the serial numbers and check the paper. That was one of the first things I remember. And I got knocked down so far. And then not only did I didn't lose a job, I lost my personality. That's who I was. I didn't do it for money. I did it because I felt like I was one of the only people that could do it. And because the guys that were doing it with me deserved to have somebody there that, would give them the best opportunity of coming home. And to lose all that, man, I'm going to tell you, I don't really know how to describe it. I guess maybe falling off a motorcycle, sliding across pavement and hitting the curb would be the closest thing. So all of that got taken away. And then slowly after the treatment, I started to feel a little better, just a little bit here and there, a little bit here and there. And after the first year, I kind of had an epiphany, and I was like, I have not had any sort of the irritable outburst. And when I say irritable outburst, I got to be definitive here. I'm talking about smashing the furniture in my house for 5 minutes and then getting done and not knowing that I've done it, not knowing why I was even mad, what I was angry about. It's really easy to lump that under PTSD. And that's a whole different conversation. I do not believe that those are there. It would be impossible that me and every single other guy I know that's been standing on top of an explosive is having the same PTSD symptom exactly. People can doubt that or question it as much as they want. But after that first year, I call them seizures. I believe they're seizures. I would say to anybody, prove to me they're not seizures. If you got a doctor who thinks that's not a seizure, I'd say prove it. I'm not convinced. I'm convicted. I experienced them. I've read about the symptoms of seizures. Every successful treatment I had was an anti-seizure treatment. I think that the intranasal stem cell treatment could fall under that umbrella. I don't want to try and tell you what your treatments do or don't do.
Well, it's typically repairing damaged cells. So stem cells find the areas of damage and degeneration and become brand new cells. They turn into brain cells or heart, lung, liver, kidney, pancreas, gut, joint. So it's making brand new cells that keep dividing and dividing. So the damaged tissue and the organ has more of these cells in it going forward. So that, creates the repair.
So it can make the repair. So that's why I say it's a math problem. You got, I need to build 46 billion neuronal connections and coat them 360 degrees. I check my number here, but 3 billion stem cells that multiply 5 times a day for about 5 years. I look at those two numbers. I actually did it on a calculator one time, and it's roughly the same. That would be about the number of cells that you would need to repair the complexity of the brain. And so, moving forward in the recovery, after I left the service, I participated in the Army Warrior Games and the Invictus Games, which are essentially national and international military Paralympic games. I picked archery because, number one, shooting guns is expensive, and with a bow, I could just get my bullets back out of the target, so I could shoot as much as I want. But it was the same thing I was doing in my therapy. I was balancing, I was stressing my eyes, I was stressing my balance. I was using breathing techniques, and I was out watching the guys with no legs, the guys that had their legs blown off, run around the track. And I remember thinking, okay, well, if I had no legs, I'd do the same thing. But I do have legs, and I need to rebuild a brain. So, how do I go about that? I've done the physical part, reconnecting, my body to my brain. How do I get my memory back? And it dawned on me that I should probably go to school, which I left the service with a GED. I hated school. I'm dysgraphic. It's like dyslexia. I don't know enough about it to tell you what the differences are. But when
did you first realize that you wanted to go to law school?
Once I realized how much this helped me, I started calling back to the guys that I knew that had been blown up before me. And I said, hey guys, what can I do for you? What I thought I was going to do at first was get these guys the Purple Hearts they deserve. This is a whole nother podcast. I think there's probably at least 40,000 service members that were injured similarly to me that didn't get Purple Hearts. And that is why I went to law school originally,
right.
Was to start helping these guys apply for their Purple Hearts, figuring out the system. And I will bring, as soon as I pass the bar here in February, fingers crossed, I'll take my first 2 cases, guys that I was in the infantry with I was there. I saw their injuries, unambiguously injured, vehicle blown to bits, no Purple Heart, because somebody didn't sign a piece of paper somewhere. So I'll sue for those. But really, I went to associates and my business program because I was like, I have to reassemble the brain. I thought about it like, I'm plugging the wires back in. I know I'm kind of a, knuckle dragger, and that's a little bit of a simplistic, view of it, but that's how I felt. I said, I have to use my memory. I got to learn how to read again. I got to learn how to remember things again. That's why, I don't know, you can see my drum kit in the back. I'm learning how to play the drums just to everything I've done since the injury has been designed to reassemble my brain. Mm-hmm. And I went to a business program because I was spending so much time in the doctors. I figured I would never be able to get a job again. But I would hire myself. I could choose my own level of course. So I did the business program, and after I'd contacted my friends that were injured, and I mean, all of them were not doing good. And you've met some of them now through the nonprofit I started to get other service members the same treatment. But those guys weren't doing good. And a couple of the guys that you've met were actually my soldiers. I had 2 assigned in Afghanistan the first time. Madigan is the guy that you've met, and he was actually my soldier. And was injured and left without a Purple Heart, never been treated. And I just couldn't live with that. So I started calling lawyers, and I said, hey, can you help me get these guys Purple Hearts? And they pretty much laughed at me. There's no money in it. They didn't see any upside to it.
They didn't want to take the time to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I got mad. I mean, I am the biggest knuckle dragger in the world. Law school was tough for anybody. I think it was tough for me because I'm not a great student, but it was revenge, man. I woke up every morning and I was like, I don't care what I have to do to help these guys out. I'm going to do it. And, my religious beliefs also, lead me to believe that those things also did a lot for me. They did a lot for my family. And through this process, I've gotten a really close view. I've really been able to pay attention to what's been happening to me. My memory has improved. And when I say my memory's improved, people are like, well, what does that mean? And it's kind of a sad metric, and there's a lot for traumatic brain injury like this. But, it was probably a year or 2 ago. I was shopping with my wife. I had my list and my coffee cup with me, and I set them down and walked away in the store. And like I normally do, because that's a memory issue. Most people don't do that. You would remember before you leave the area that you left stuff. I lose things or lost things all the time. And I remember it vividly because I hadn't done it since I've been blown up. I realized that I left it there, and I walked straight to where it was, just like I would do if I had left it there before I was injured, picked him up, and I went and told my wife. I was almost crying. I know it sounds crazy, but I was like, babe, I remember where I put my cup of coffee.
Of course. When you lose that ability to do very simple and basic things, and then you regain that, that's just it's a world of difference. It's a whole new life. And I'll say, your conversation and your ability to explain everything is so eloquent and is so well thought out, and you're not hitching and, reaching for words and this and that, and knowing how you started when we first met and our conversations and what you've come to now is spectacular. And there's no one in the world who's had a traumatic brain injury like you've had that's gone through law school, and has the intellect, the intelligence, and the ability and the perseverance that you have. It just that doesn't happen.
Man, I'm blessed. Again, from having this treatment twice, I'm telling you, I know that's such a weird thing to say that I can remember where I put my coffee cup. But when I see these guys similarly injured, I mean, they lose.
Sure.
We'll go into a restaurant. They'll leave their phone in the restaurant and bring their cup outside with them.
Yeah.
And
because the wiring is completely destroyed. Yeah.
Just destroyed. And there's nothing else. There is nothing else. And that's not just me saying it. That's what the scientific studies say. In the aggregate, all these other treatments essentially, I don't know if this is cussing or not, but you're pissing up a rope. And it makes me mad because the amount of beds we have in the treatment programs that do occupational therapy, visual therapy, and I'm not saying those things are worthless, but I'm saying the value that we can give to the population that we have is a fraction of what's needed. And I believe the big argument against treating everybody right now is the cost. Yeah. I went into, like I said, the VA prep program, 3 months of inpatient treatment. There's 8 beds. All right. There's at least, at bare minimum, based on the Defense Veteran Brain Injury Research Center's own numbers, 38,000 service members have been treated for blast. How many years would it take at 3 months and 8 beds to treat all those guys? Yeah. We can't do it.
Yeah.
This treatment, my entire point for coming on your program and to cap off where I am and what I've been. After I got the treatment, I started the Blastology Foundation with Alyssa Krebs and John Klanowski. Alyssa's a fellow law school student. John is a Challenge Aspen director for over 15 years. They bring guys out to Aspen to go skiing. And that's how I met him. But we started this foundation to raise money to get this treatment for other veterans.
Of course. And we've both tried, and you hit roadblocks and such, but together our goal is to be able to treat every one of the veterans who's wounded that needs it. So we'll keep pushing and we'll make it happen.
Yeah, I think we can get there.
Absolutely. Take some work, and work together would certainly be. It's a wonderful goal of ours to be able to do this. So we'll make it happen.
Yeah.
Always wonderful chatting with you, buddy. I know we talk a lot, and we always have some great conversations. I'm just very thankful that you had the result you have, and you're driven to work and to create more and more strength and to help so many of your buddies out. It really is an honor and a pleasure to talk with you and to work with you to get these things done. I think that, the unrelenting push that we need to keep, moving forward will allow us to be able to treat more of these guys. So it's a wonderful, wonderful time to be able to have this information, everything you brought to the front today, to get out to thousands and maybe millions of people, through the podcast. I want to be able to get this out to so many people that everybody understands, what you've been through.
Yeah, well, I mean, to all those people, I'd like to say, if you feel compelled to support this effort, you can find us at www.blastology.org. Our donations right now, I don't take any money for what we're doing. Neither does Alyssa or John. All our donations right now go to paying for travel and treatment for veterans that have blast-related traumatic brain injuries. There's a lot of them. We have a lot of need. This treatment is, through my vast experience with treatments and traumatic brain injury, is the only thing that can help these guys. I got a lot of friends. I wish you guys could, see the effect it's having, and I hope you will. So come check us out.
Well, we'll document it. The more people that we work with, the more people that we treat, the more we're going to want to document it. We'll do repeated and many podcasts on this and going forward, and I love having you here to, give us your heart and give us your conversation. And each of the gentlemen that we've treated so far, we want to bring them on and have them talk about their benefits. So we're going to put this out there as much as humanly possible.
Well, I appreciate you having me on.
Always a pleasure, buddy. God bless you and have a wonderful day. We'll chat with you soon.
Yep. Thanks.
Okay, bye-bye now.
Bye.